Economic Development Committee meeting, and it is 8 o'clock, and we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to ask Senator Burns if he'd open us up in prayer. Number 3.
If you'll join me in prayer, please. Father God, we're richly blessed, and we're highly favored to live in a land of eminent and extensive possibilities and opportunities. We're grateful for the privilege of service. We're grateful for the opportunity to enhance the economic growth and development of our state. Thank you for the day. Give us your wisdom and your guidance. In Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Okay.
Amen.
Thank you, Senator Burns. Well, again, welcome to our meeting. We've got a pretty full agenda here. We're going to hear first from the fintech industry, which is a great industry. I call it Transaction Alley. I represent kind of that Georgia 400 corridor. So I'd first like to first off, I'd like to thank Jay Morgan for putting this together. Thank you. You do a great job representing that industry. I'd like to, I guess, John Perry, are you going to go first? And then sure. Chris Wasserman and Paulette Rowe. So y'all go in whatever order you'd like to go. And y'all can all come up and sit here at the mic and give us a presentation and tell us a little bit about the fintech business and how it's going. Paulette, if you want to come to the, Paulette, come on over here to this mic. You got 1, 2, and 3. Okay, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having the opportunity to speak to everyone here. My name is John Perry. I'm the CEO of Bluefin. We are located just off of Exit 6 up 400. I've been the CEO of the company since 2011 when we relocated the company to Atlanta. I've got a couple of prepared remarks. I won't keep it too long, but hopefully tell you a little bit more about Bluefin and how engaged we are with the state of Georgia. Bluefin is, as you may or may not know, is a global leader in payment security, specializing in encryption and tokenization solutions that protect sensitive data and personal data from cyber threats. We operate in 60 countries, and the company is best known for its patented PCI-validated point-to-point encryption solution, which secures payment transactions from the point of sale to processing and significantly reducing the risk of data breaches, which is really important in today's commerce environment. In addition to P2PE, Bluefin also provides robust tokenization and secure data management solutions for industries including healthcare, higher ed, and government and retail. We have several customers here in Georgia, including Emory, Southern Company, Children's Healthcare, and others. Atlanta often is referred to as Transaction Alley due to its high concentration of financial technology firms that serve, and it also serves as Bluefin's headquarters and strategic innovation center. The company benefits from the city's vast fintech ecosystem, access to a very skilled workforce, and strong collaboration with local universities and research institutions. Bluefin's Atlanta-based employees play a critical role in every aspect of the business, from developing next-generation cybersecurity solutions to providing compliance guidance and customer support for a global client base of more than 35,000 businesses. The strength of Bluefin's Atlanta workforce lies in its ability to drive continuous innovation in the evolving landscape of payment security. Our engineers and developers in the city focus on refining Bluefin's encryption and tokenization technologies, ensuring they stay ahead of the emerging cyber threats and regulatory changes. Meanwhile, the company's compliance experts work closely with regulatory bodies such as the PCI Security Standards Council to ensure that Bluefin solutions not only meet but exceed industry security standards. Beyond technology, Bluefin's Atlanta team is also deeply engaged in fostering industry collaboration and thought leadership. The company actively participates in fintech conferences, cybersecurity forums, and local workforce development initiatives to support the next generation of professionals in the field. Through strategic partnerships, ongoing research, and a commitment to excellence, Bluefin continues to reinforce both its leadership in the payment security and Atlanta's status as a powerhouse for fintech innovation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. All right, let's get everybody to present, and then we'll go to questions. Who's next? You want to go next?
Chris is next.
All right.
Good morning,
Mr.
everyone.
Wasserman.
Yes, good morning. I'm Chris Wasserman. I'm the founder and chief recruiting officer for Wasserman Talent Solutions. I'm here to speak to you this morning about workforce development and training, specifically in fintech and the thriving environment that we have here.
Can you move that mic a little closer?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
And the thriving environment that we have here in our great state. I'm sure many of you are aware, but in case you're not, about north of 70% of all transactions run right through companies here in our Georgia. We're not as well known as the Deltas and the Home Depots because we're more of a conglomerate of many companies that make up a vast majority of the workforce here in our great state. And so I want to talk to you about and plant a seed about how do we continue to maintain our exceptional talent workforce, and how do we continue to educate, attract, and retain for our future generations. And so there are a few things, a couple items just to talk to you about. First is, as I mentioned, workforce training and education. So far, we have a phenomenal university system. I'm a proud Yellow Jacket myself. I'm an engineer who became a recruiter of engineers, kind of a unique skill set. Georgia Tech and UGA and our other great, KSU, other great Georgia-based universities do a wonderful job there, but also from a trade school, career academy, and technical college. We really are focusing on developing the career paths that a four-year degree may not be necessary, but can also add tremendous value and skill set to our workforce with high-paying jobs. And I want to continue to make sure that we focus on those types of investments within our school system. We also want to talk about the incentives potentially to attract and retain talent here in Georgia. It is a thriving economy. It is a place to be, but we are faced with more global competition regularly. And one of the worst scenarios I could think of is the possibility of outsourcing our jobs. We don't want to be an exporter of jobs. We want to make sure that companies are incentivized to invest in the talent right here in our great state, and then also retain that talent. And in a very competitive landscape, there needs to be a government, private, and educational partnership that is a trifecta to create and retain exceptional talent. With that said, also there is an evolving risk from a technology perspective of cybersecurity, and the types of positions and threats that this can impact. With everyone being an electronic payment these days, debit, credit, we want to make sure and ensure that we're investing in the right type of people and talent that are continuously protecting our financial resources as well. So with that, I appreciate your time, and I just want to leave you with all of the thoughts around Georgia being a phenomenal place to build a company with exceptional talent, and let's keep it that way. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Rowe,
Yes, thank you very much.
thank you for being here.
Paulette Rowe, I'm the CEO of Stax. It's a payments technology company, started 10 years ago. The founders of Stax are based in Orlando, so hence our HQ is in Orlando. But we increasingly use Georgia as an important hub for the business. I'm from the UK. I moved here in 2023. I've worked in other parts of the US before. But when I was moving here, I went to do some research in terms of whether I should be in Orlando, whether I should be in Knoxville, where my investors are, and everything pointed to Transaction Alley being the best place to locate myself. Many of my customers are here, many of the vendors that we use are here, and it's just an incredible place to do business. Just to say a little bit more about Stax, we pride ourselves in removing friction in the payment processing process for small businesses and helping software companies who sell enterprise software use payments as a way of driving additional revenue. I mentioned that we are a 10-year-old company. We've already reached a $1 billion valuation, and we are supporting over 35,000 businesses across America. In terms of Transaction Alley and the opportunities that we see here, Georgia, as you know, is home to nearly 250 fintechs. There are 50,000 financial technology-related jobs already predominantly in the payment industry based out of Georgia. And it is, in fact, the highest concentration in the world, providing an incredible talent pool. We've just recently been looking for a senior appointment, a chief product officer, and I'm pleased to say normally I would expect the best candidates to be coming from places like California because of the huge investment in fintech that used to take place there. But now we find that the best talent is coming from this state. So we're down to our 4 final candidates. 3 of them are based out of Georgia, which is incredibly exciting. For me personally, it wasn't just about the incredible support that Georgia provides to Transaction Alley and the fact that we could be part of, I could be part of living and working in an incredible marketplace for fintech talent and companies, but also the quality of life that we enjoy here in Georgia. So areas like Ponce City Market, the Beltline, the growing of the MARTA services, making it easy to move across the state and across Atlanta. These are all things that we're finding is bringing more and more talent to this area and helping Stax and other fintech companies grow here. I'm also very, very grateful to the number of not-for-profits here, in particular the ATPC, which has been supporting not only us as companies in terms of understanding how to build businesses here, make connections here, but also have invested in, again, the talent pool in this area. So, for example, the ATPC founded the Georgia FinTech Academy. That is a program, as you heard also from Chris, that is working with the university system across Georgia and has produced 7,000 FinTech-ready workers since its inception in 2017. I had the great pleasure last year of partnering with UGA and their FinTech program. I attended the students, the final student presentations, and I have to say the quality was outstanding. And there were a number of people there who I'm sure will find great future careers in FinTech, and we ourselves are looking at the possibility of hiring some of those individuals. So the whole ecosystem, the marketplace of just having such a concentration of businesses here, a concentration of talent, and the very many not-for-profit organizations that are helping to build Georgia's reputation is the reason why when I look at the future of Stax, we are actively considering moving our HQ to Georgia. It's not a light decision to take. But if we do move our HQ, the only state for us that would make sense is Georgia. So wanted to share how excited I am
We'd love to have you.
To be here, and thank you very much for all that you're doing to support our industry.
Real quickly, the Academy, how many graduates did you say they've had?
7,000.
And have they been placed in jobs? Those, I mean, do
sure
they
Chris
get
may
placed
be able
pretty, if
to-
they get out of the Academy, do they have a good opportunity to find a job in the FinTech industry?
Yes, the answer is that there's a very high success ratio.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to open up. We're going to take about 3 or 4 minutes for questions, and then I'll wrap it up. Any questions of the panel? Senator McLaurin, what are you? 10?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for coming today and visiting us. It's always good to learn about things that we didn't get in our K through 12 or post-secondary education. So I had the opportunity to go to your conference, the regional conference, I guess it was a few months ago, and just kind of be in awe of what I was looking at. I saw a presentation on blockchain, and that we shouldn't just associate blockchain with cryptocurrency, that there are other applications or there are transactional applications that are relevant to your industry. I'm curious kind of what your take is on the future of blockchain in your space.
Let's go first.
Go ahead.
In a previous role, I actually worked with a number of cryptocurrency companies. I think the industry is going to, and I was also at Meta that launched Libra, and it didn't go too well, but it was an attempt. So I think it's going to morph into using blockchain as a sort of infrastructure for driving financial transactions. And I think stablecoin is something that we should all be talking about, thinking about, and how that can help with cross-border transactions. So, yeah, I think there's a lot still to come. It's not just about speculation in terms of price volatility, which is where most people experience crypto today.
Yeah, meme dogs and bubbles.
Exactly.
And okay,
Yeah.
more to it than that.
There's
All right.
much more to it.
Okay.
There's a real technology behind it.
Thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right, well, I just want to thank you for being here. Number one, Jay Morgan does a great job down here representing you guys. And I don't think we thank you guys enough for your investment in Georgia and the employees and the jobs you create. And as Chairman of Economic Development, I want to publicly just say thank you all for being here and thank you for creating jobs. And if you need anything from workforce development or infrastructure, just let us know. We want to help grow this industry. And we want your headquarters to come to Atlanta,
We're
to Georgia.
thinking about it.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, the first bill we've got is a committee sub, and I believe is Chairman Dolezal, the Chief Deputy Whip here? Oh, I see. Come on up, Chief Deputy Whip. And you can present from here. I believe we're working off LC 55047-4S, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Well, if you would tell us about this bill, we'd like to hear about it.
Thank you,
Floor is
Chairman.
yours.
Thank you for having me this morning, members of the committee. Good to see you all again. And Chairman, I don't know how you get your committee members here on time, and for an on-time start to your committee, I'm going to ask you for some pointers on that.
They
for-
love
for my
jobs, they
team.
love economic development, and they love BLB. They want to come here and hang out. And I tell you what, I want to tell the committee, next committee meeting, I'll have some breakfast. I'll have some Chick-fil-A or something. We're going to take care of you. I don't think you do that in transportation, but I'm going to do it in economic development and tourism. I'm going to set the standard, Mr. Chairman.
You do
All right.
nothing if you don't set standards, Mr.
All right.
Chairman. Committee members, I bring before you the Red Tape Rollback Bill of 2025. This is really probably an 80% carryover from the bill that we passed out of the Senate last year. Did not get across the finish line in the House, and hope to get it across the finish line this year. Many of you are probably familiar with discussion that's happened at the federal level around what's called the REINS Act, and this bill closely mirrors the REINS Acts that have been passed in Florida, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Kansas. Some of those go back all the way to 2010. A couple states have passed those last year when we tried to pass ours. And I want to first give credit to Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones for championing this legislation both last year and this year. This is a recognition of really two separate things. One, that we need to keep an eye out for small businesses in the state of Georgia. For as much talk as there is here around big business, we know that more than 85% of Georgians are actually employed by small business here in the state. And that if we're not careful, those regulations on small businesses can make it such that business owners spend far more time complying with regs than they do running their business. And then secondarily to that, it places the General Assembly in the driver's seat around rulemaking. And currently we have the ability to stop certain rules. This bill will clarify that ability, but also put us in the driver's seat for rules that will have significant economic impact to the businesses in the state of Georgia. There's really 5 key components to this bill. It's 22, I think, pages long, so it's a somewhat hefty pill to swallow. So I want to walk you through the core elements of the bill, and then happy to answer any questions. Lines 26 to 92, this was in the bill last year, introduces this concept of a small business impact analysis. All of you are familiar with our fiscal notes, and this is, I would say, in the spirit of a fiscal note, allows chairman of committees, Speaker of the House, Lieutenant Governor to request a small business impact analysis, and allows us to request those both in and out of session. And so if we have bills that we think may impact small business, we can ask OPB and DOAA to implement this small business impact analysis which will answer our questions as to what, if any, the proposed bill, what its impact may be on small businesses in the state. Secondly, on lines 94 through 140, we have an economic impact analysis, and this is different from the small business analysis in that it's not a review of proposed legislation. It is a review of proposed rulemaking that the rulemakers would anticipate would have more than a $1 million impact over the first 5 years of implementation. So if the rulemakers deem that the rule is likely to have $1 million impact or greater, then they are required to produce this economic impact analysis. And I would point you specifically to lines 123 to 140, and that will outline for you what the construct of the economic impact analysis must include, and that includes an estimate, identification when possible, of the number of individuals, businesses, and units of local government subject to proposed rules. I think it's important, I didn't mention this a couple seconds ago, but this particular section also applies to local governments. So if an agency were to propose a rule that is specific to local government that would require local government to spend over, or local governments, I should say, to spend over $1 million, it triggers this need for the economic impact analysis. What we are doing here is we're trying to get agencies and rulemakers to think about the cost of complying with the rules and finding ways, when possible, to minimize that cost to follow the rules. Section 3 of the, or what I'm calling Section 3 of the bill, in terms of the 5 prongs of the bill, is on lines 268 to 323. And this gets around our current standing committee's abilities to object to rulemaking and what that looks like for a standing committee to object to a rule. Currently, a rule, if it's objected to by a standing committee, stands as written until the General Assembly is in session, and then there's a process once we're in session that we can go through the process to objecting to and ultimately overturning a rule. What this section does is it says that if a standing committee votes to object to a rule, that rule is actually stayed until we get back into session, and then we'll essentially adjudicate the validity of the rule and go through a process by which, if both chambers will object, then the rule is stayed.
Mr. Chairman, can you
Yes.
talk a little more about that? So if DOT put in a rule
Yep.
and you had a DOT meeting, a Transportation Committee meeting, and you objected to the rule, then it would not go into effect until we came back to session.
Correct.
And then would we take that up immediately in your first committee meeting to vote
We
on
would
it?
then have there's a process in the bill that would then go through an official objection process by which both chambers and the governor's office have basically a voice in the process of that rule going into effect.
And then DOT would come and explain why they were doing
Correct.
that? And you'd,
Correct. So as you know, currently we have the option to do that, but that is essentially the rule stays into effect until it is overturned. Under this change, we basically say if a standing committee objects to the rule, which as you know is very rare,
Yeah.
that rule is then stayed until the General Assembly comes into place.
Gotcha.
This is really, the thought here is that the elected officials have a voice in essentially, they're the backstop is probably the best way to say it, and any sort of rule that may have unintended consequences.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Could you help us understand, when we are not in session, how would the committee convene to object to a rule?
The committee, the chairman would call a meeting of the committee, and then if the majority of the, actually 2/3 of the voting members of the committee would object to the rule, then that rule is stayed until we come back into session.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
My Section 4, or the fourth thing that the bill does, is it requires a ratification of rules that require an economic impact analysis. I'm going back to the second thing that I talked about, which is the economic impact analysis that is triggered when the rulemakers can reasonably expect a rule to cost more than $1 million over the first 5 years of implementation. Any rule that triggers an economic impact analysis does not go into place until it is ratified by the General Assembly. There's 2 processes for ratification. The first process is a vote by 2/3 of either body, so essentially a veto-proof majority of either body would be able to vote on that, either chamber, house, both chambers, House and Senate, then the rule would go into effect. If a rule receives a majority vote but not a 2/3 vote, it actually requires signature of the governor. So very similar processes to a bill passing there. If the bill gets a majority of both chambers and is signed by the governor, then the bill goes into effect. If neither of those things happen, I should say the rule, then the rule does not go into effect. The last thing that the bill does, major thing that the bill does, there's a couple other smaller things I'm not necessarily going to highlight here, but is it requires this 4-year review process for rules. That's on line 371 to 426. And then as it relates to constitutional officers, except for the governor, that's on line 428 to 487. And these are very similar processes, but we do recognize the difference of the constitutional agencies versus the non-constitutional agencies. And I talked about this last year when we passed this out of the Senate to kind of conceptualize this for us as essentially zero-based rulemaking. We've heard of zero-based budgeting, whereby the budget makers will go through and essentially have to look at each element of their budget and re-justify the existence of the budget. There is a similar process for this 4-year rulemaking process, whereby the agencies are required in the bill to go through and justify the rules that are in effect, and look at ways and ask the questions within the agency of whether there are more simple ways that the same goal of the rule can be accomplished. And any rules that are not re-promulgated in that process would then expire. In addition to that, any agency who within that 4-year process has reduced their rules by 10%, they are exempt from this 4-year reviews. There's incentives within the bill for agencies to look internally at their existing rules, some of which may be decades old, and to ask the question as to whether or not the original intent of those rules is A, still valid, and B, if it is still the best way to reach the desired outcome. The last thing that I want to highlight in the bill is we changed the employee count on small businesses from 100 to 300. Currently in Georgia code, there is a mandate to rule makers to specifically look at their rules through the lens of small business, and if there is a way for they're required to essentially look at ways that where a minimum impact on those rules can be passed down to small business. And we recognize that even if you have a business of 150 employees, you very well may be a small business. You need to be independently owned and operated, not dominant in your field, and less than 300 employees to qualify as a small business. That's a change from the current number of 100.
Okay.
So like I said, Mr. Chairman, I know that there's a lot to digest in this bill, and happy to answer any questions that I can.
All right. You got a question? All right. Vice Chairman Ginn?
Yeah, appreciate your presentation. I guess I'm a little slow, so I really want to, if you can walk me through an example of an agency rule that comes in that, just step me through that, what it's going to look
Sure.
like.
So there's two paths in the road. One path is for a rule that is not deemed to have require an economic impact analysis. So think about sub $1 million of implementation cost. Those rules go into effect, and they follow the same process that we follow today. They would they would go into effect on either July 1st or January 1st, which is another tweak in the bill. We kind of basically have two days now that bills
Pick an
go
agency.
into effect.
Pick an agency and give me, I'm just looking for something that you know of that okay, this would actually address or.
Sure. So DOT implements a rule around traffic lights that's passed down to local government that's a simple programming that may not have likely would not have $1 million impact analysis. That bill goes into effect on one of the 2 trigger dates in the year, unless it is objected to by the chairman of Senate or House Transportation. If that happens, that rule is stayed. When we go back into session, then there's a process to adjudicate that rule. That's for the non-$1 million. So they happen immediately. They go into effect immediately. If it is deemed to require an economic impact analysis and is going to have a larger economic cost to following the rule, that triggers the ratification process. That then puts the General Assembly in one instance, or the General Assembly and the governor in the other instance. It requires them to ratify the rule, whereas the first sub $1 million does not require the ratification.
So I'll pick on the example with Department of Transportation. A lot of the things that they get shoved down to them come from the feds on federal requirements for changing traffic signals or changing guardrails or any number of things. So where they're having to follow unfortunately, federal regulations, and they're adapting their rules to follow that. Would this apply to?
This would apply if it's over $1 million. Part of what's required in that economic impact analysis report is an answer to the question of whether this is a requirement passed on the Fed so that can be recognized.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator Watson?
Yeah, just a couple of questions, and you can help me. Remember, I mean, we get the notices on the rules, and does it change? We have, I think, maybe 15 days, 30 days to call a meeting and object. That's not changing?
Correct. There is, I'm going to need to double check that for you in real time here. I'm going to go to line 268. All right, so if you look at, actually, that's not the right spot. So there's a period of time, I'm going to go to the second part of what happens here. If the objection is made, within the first 15 days, the agency needs to state whether they intend to follow if they intend to continue to push the rule through. You have to file your resolution within the first 15 days, and by day 30 of the General Assembly, it needs to be passed by both chambers, or the rule goes into effect.
So probably not as much an issue during session, but it's off session that gets to be a little bit more.
Yeah, I'm just
onerous.
trying to find this section for you, and I can't find it here that identifies that. I'll get back to you on that if I can.
Okay, that's perfectly fine. Second question, if you don't mind, Mr. Chairman. Public health emergencies or other type of emergencies, how does this take effect, or does this have any effect on that at all?
It does not. You'll see a series of lines on, I think it's 130, if I recall correctly, that were struck
Maybe
as it relates.
291 is.
Well, those are, the lines that were struck were reorganized essentially and moved later in the bill, probably into what you're seeing on 291.
Okay.
So that language, actually on 351 and 354 is where I'm seeing that as well. That has just been reorganized in the code, and nothing is changing within the code other than the placement within the sections as it relates to both emergency orders and the 120-day tail after the emergency for those rules to stay in effect. That's the current law, and that stays in effect under the bill.
So from my perspective, it's a little bit onerous for a chairman to do that, to call off session. Is there any way we can make that easier, or should we make it easier? Maybe it should be onerous. That's a sort of a discussion thought.
Yeah, so we're not changing that process necessarily. What we are changing, so I would say a couple things. One, in the 7 years that I've been here, I don't know that that's ever happened. So I think that it is intentionally difficult, or it's intentionally such that it's not done very often. But when it is done, it would be under a situation where the chairman deemed it significant enough for him or her to convene the committee. But again, that process is in current code. All that we're changing here is the fact that if it is objected to, the rule is stayed until we come into session, as opposed to the rule being in place. And essentially, you're filing your objection under current law, and you're holding it until session, whereas you file it and it's adjudicated during session, but the rule is stayed in the interim.
So in essence, it's the only change is that if it is objected to, it is in place until we get back in session, and this holds that in session.
That's correct.
So your thoughts on making it easier, more difficult, or keeping it as it is? You, I guess, elected to keep it as it is when it comes to calling that. I've been here maybe a little bit longer than you. And since you've been here, actually, I think there have been some objections, but never a committee has been called that I'm aware of. And it's usually worked through.
Yeah, if you have a suggestion on that, this to me is not, that section of the bill is not necessarily gospel, so
Thank you.
I'm open to conversation on that.
Listen, I think the key to this bill is, one, that every 4 years, these executive branches have to really go from top to bottom and review everything and look at, what they can do to be more efficient. And then two, we're reducing paperwork on small business. Anything we can do to reduce compliance and paperwork and let small business make money, I think is a good thing, and not have an over-regulation. So
I think the other thing, Chairman, if I can add to that, oftentimes, I'll give you an example. I'm a partner in a small business that employs about 75 people. And the compliance processes from us have seemingly become more than half of our job. But we don't know how to reach the people to complain to them necessarily that we need to complain to. This puts the elected officials who are closest to the people. It allows business owners and executives to reach out and communicate to them on either something that is happening or even something where they can then ask for that to be looked at specifically during this four-year review period as well. So one of the intentions of this bill is to push the rulemaking process somewhat cross-disciplinary between the agencies and the legislators, whereas currently it sits just with the legislator or with the agencies.
Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and open it to the public. Okay, can we, let's do the public real quick, and then we'll come back to questions, and then we'll entertain a motion. They're going to go to the podium. You can stay right there, Chairman. Tony West, if you could come up here and keep it to a couple minutes, and then we've got Kennedy Atkins, if you be ready right afterwards. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Tony West. I'm the State Director for Americans for Prosperity here in Georgia. I'm here to support this bill. As Chairman Dolezal has explained already, this legislation wisely puts into place regular procedures to ensure that our state's regulatory policy is responsive to the public and doesn't become overburdensome and harmful to the private sector. Sections 2.4 outlines analyses that should be conducted every 4 years by each agency to ensure existing rules and regulations that are on the books are serving their purpose and legislative intent, not causing more harm than good, and considering alternative policies that would be more appropriate than the status quo. This is like a quadrennial spring cleaning for our regulatory code, wholly appropriate and overdue. Section 2.2 also includes important regulatory reform, but for proposed rules yet to be implemented. For the first time, this legislation would require agencies to consider the economic impact of a proposed rule. Additionally, for major rules with significant potential costs to businesses, a formal economic analysis would be required, and the legislature would have enhanced oversight over these major rules to better serve their constituents' interests. Overall, this bill will lead to more transparency and accountability in the rulemaking process, and I urge the committee's favorable consideration.
Thank you. All right, Kennedy Atkins.
Chairman Beach, members of the committee, my name is Kennedy Atkins. I'm the Government Affairs Manager at the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, Georgia Policy Impact. Thank you for the honor of addressing you today in support of SB 28. We believe this legislation provides important mechanisms for ensuring state agencies are regularly reviewing their regulations. As you'll see in the one-pager we provided, if it made it in the folder, if not, I'll get it to Chairman Beach. Georgia's code has grown continuously since the state first began tracking regulations in 1965. The state code now contains over 18,000 regulations, over 15% of which were found in need of review due to being out of date or containing references to repealed regulations. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you. Stephanie Zanik.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Stephanie Zanker. I am the Strategic Director for the Libre Initiative. We focus on empowering the Latino community so that they can prosper and achieve their American dream. And I am here to speak in support of SB 28. Libre supports the bill for many of the same reasons that other organizations like Americans for Prosperity and Georgia Public Policy Foundation have already mentioned in terms of needing more accountability. But I also want to stress the importance of this bill for the Latino community. At over 1 million, the Latino population makes up 11% of the total population of the state of Georgia, and our community's growth rate is actually surpassing the national average. And we have a dynamic community of Latino entrepreneurs and business owners that significantly contribute to a thriving Georgia economy and to the prosperity of their own families and communities. Latinos contribute $60.35 billion in economic growth to Georgia. 1 in 4 new businesses are Latino-owned and seeing rapid growth. And so it's in our community's best interest to enact legislation like SB 28. These regulatory reforms are not only critical for the state's growth, but they're also a win for Latino families and business owners. So by cutting through complicated rules and reducing the financial burden of compliance, these changes help small businesses thrive, allowing Latino entrepreneurs to focus on growth, innovation, and importantly, creating more jobs. I think this is a step forward in ensuring a more inclusive economic environment for all, and it will help keep Georgia the #1 state to do business. Thank you very much for your time, and I urge the committee's favorable consideration.
Thank you. That closes public comment on SB 28. I'll now open it up for questions. Senator Jones, which mic are you? 11?
Yes, I'm on 11.
You got you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Senator, thank you for bringing Senate Bill 28 and its substitute. I'm trying to kind of wrap my head around what the bill does. Does this, and correct me, does it create a legislative agency that can insert themselves in rulemakings for any of these state agencies? Is that essentially what this bill does?
No, there's no legislative agency that's created. This really does two things. One, it clarifies and somewhat tweaks the existing ability for the General Assembly to object to a rule. And then it puts rules that have a significant economic cost for compliance into a separate category and requires those rules to go through a different vetting process than rules that are deemed to not have that same economic impact. But this does not, the review process that I mentioned, if that's what you're getting to, that is done internally with the agency and is not done by the General Assembly. The 4-year review process.
I guess I'm trying to understand how the review process would work, and I know there's a body in the General Assembly that would be empowered. Is that correct?
Are you speaking to the 4-year review process that I'm calling the zero-based rulemaking, or are you referencing the review process for new rules?
Both.
Okay, so taking the review process for new rules, again, we're essentially, that's traveling under the existing review objection ability that we have as a General Assembly to object to rules. It merely changes what happens when an objection is filed, and then it secondarily places into a new category and requires ratification for the rules that do have a significant economic impact. On the review process relative to the agencies, the zero-based rulemaking that's at the end of the bill, that is all done internally within the agency and is envisioned as an agency review process done on their own.
I guess I'm trying to kind of see how it all is going to work and still allow the agencies to perform the duties and tasks that they've been asked to do. And what I see is perhaps will there be some kind of hurdle that this agency would, additional hurdle, if you will, that this agency would have to overcome and able to be able to pass, say, a new rule as an example?
So there will be an additional hurdle for those that are deemed to have an economic impact over $1 million. For those that do not, there is no hurdle that does not exist today. It just changes the objection process. It does require for those bills that have the $1 million or more impact, I should say, I keep saying bills, rules. For those rules that have the $1 million or more economic impact, it does require those to be ratified either by 2/3 of the General Assembly or a majority of the General Assembly with signature by the governor.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I guess as a small business owner, I'm trying to understand how this would impact, say, my particular industry as an example. But when an objection is raised, you say for $1 million impact and over, I'm trying to understand how would a particular business, small business, know that this impact would be in excess of $1 million?
It's not up to the small business to determine that. That's actually determined by the rulemaking agency. And there's some guidelines in the bill by which the rulemaking agencies are prescribed to determine that. They then, if it does not have a $1 million or more economic impact analysis, they also need to state why they believe that. So let's just take your industry as an example of car dealerships, and the DMV were to pass a new rule around the display process of vehicles in a car lot, as an example. If the agency determined that there's X amount of car dealerships in the state of Georgia, and they believe the cost of compliance is Y dollars, and X times Y equals more than $1 million, that would then trigger the economic impact analysis and would require the ratification of the General Assembly. If that rule otherwise was determined that you were going to change a field in a database of information that you submit during the licensing process for the filing of a driver's license, for example, and that it was changing from an alphanumeric code to an all numeric code or something along those lines, it was just a data entry thing where it's trading out one piece of data for another, that would reasonably be determined to not have $1 million cost, and then that rule would go into effect and not have to it would not have to go through the ratification process.
Would this be I hate to use the term, but kind of seamless and transparent process for the business owner? What impact and what input
Yes,
would the
it would be.
owners have?
So the business owner is downstream of these decisions. They're not involved in advising the agency or consulting with the agency unless they're asked. So agencies in the bill are allowed to consult industry for industry's impression of what that rule may have. So you conceivably, you or another person in your industry may receive a call from DMV in that scenario and say, hey, here's what we're thinking about doing. Walk us through what the required changes would be at the local level. Help us understand the impact of this rule, which frankly is exactly what we want to happen. We're trying to open up the dialogue between those that will be subject to the rules and those who are making the rules, so that those who are making the rules can still accomplish their goals, but in the least onerous way possible.
And one final question, Mr. Chairman. The General Assembly, once that threshold is triggered, walk me through the process, if you will, how the General Assembly would impact that proposed rule from the
So they receive
rulemaking
notice
body.
from the agency. They would receive a copy of the economic impact analysis. The standing committee would then consider the rule change. It would then go to a vote of the General Assembly in both chambers, and if it receives 2/3 vote of approval, then it is approved. It's ratified. If it receives a majority but not 2/3, then it goes to the governor for their signature. If neither of those things happen, then the rule does not go into effect.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Senator McLaurin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see you, Senator. Was your trip to California good?
It was fruitful, but I was inside of it was like Groundhog Day, Mr. Chairman. I did the same thing for 14 hours a day for 6 days in a row.
Understood. Well, I'm glad you're back safe. I have a rapid series of questions I hope to get through. First, I kind of want to acquaint our audience at home with the Marvel universe of red tape rollback. This brand has been in effect now. I guess this is the second term for the LG. And my understanding is that package, or the idea of red tape rollback as a concept, referred to a number of bills that were passed last year, including some specific regulatory environments where one-off industries or sectors were dealt with, like, for example, hair care. Is that correct, basically?
Indeed. This was the omnibus, the first version of this was the omnibus bill, though, that did not get across the finish line. But yes, we looked at licensing and a number of other things as well.
Okay. And while you had some support from the minority party for some of these particular regulatory environments, I mean, this is a much different bill in the sense that it encompasses all rulemaking across all state agencies, correct?
The newest piece, and I would say the most significant change from last year, is the economic impact analysis and what happens when an economic impact analysis is triggered. We had the zero-based rulemaking in last year's bill. We had the small business impact analysis in last year's bill. And so, yes, there are some new elements to this bill, but that would be the biggest change, I think, that I would identify.
So I kind of want to understand, just so we can, because this, you would agree with me, I mean, this gets into kind of a philosophical debate about the role of government, right? And more specifically than that, separation of powers, how the legislature should have the ultimate purview over things that are effectively having the force of law, effectively legislation, as opposed to just rulemaking regulatory bodies who are less directly accountable to people. I mean, in general, that's the kind of tension we're talking about. And I guess my question is, there are a couple decisions that are made in the bill that reflect a distrust of the administrative side, or at least the word rollback is quite clear, right? Moving the authority back to the legislature. One of those decisions is the 10% number for rules or number of rules that an agency can make, I guess, less each year. One change, I think, to the code you're making is, or maybe it was a previous version of the bill, you used to have a provision that says you're exempt from the rulemaking review if you don't increase your rules by 10%, but now the bill appears to say that the only way to exempt
That's
yourself from
correct.
review is to decrease by 10%.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And that 10% is not with regard to any specific substance of the rules or type of rulemaking. It's just any rules, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And admittedly, that is a number that was deemed to, it's an arbitrary number. If you want to make it 30%, I would probably support you on that.
I bet you would.
But it's an attempt to incentivize the reduction and the streamlining of the regulatory mechanisms in the state.
Right, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I mean, I guess because it's without any specific types of rules, the general philosophy underlying a bill like this is we simply don't trust the agencies to manage their rule portfolio well enough, and so we have to put sort of these blunt force 10% rules in place to give them any incentive to reduce the bloat.
I would not at all characterize it in that way. I would
Okay.
say that the review process is a recognition that if things are not reviewed, they're not streamlined. And so this is a mandatory review process that I think has value. It's every 4 years, so it's not like it's every 4 months. But the 10% is an incentive, so to the extent that an agency wants to bypass that process, if it's an agency that is in the process of streamlining their rules, what we know then is that that agency has looked at their rules through that 4-year period such that they have reduced them and that they are going through that process of their own accord, not under the force of law.
Has I guess we have our own OPB, I guess.
Correct, and DOA is in this bill as well.
And has OPB or any of the agencies weighed in on what this would mean, or whether they support it, or?
They weighed in on the economic impact analysis piece, the small business impact analysis piece that was in the bill last year, and yes, they have been part of the dialogue as this has gone through the process.
And I want to show respect. I understand, the bill last year. Here we are in committee again, and we've already passed out of the Senate, but Democrats always find energy the second term for the same bill. So, but I guess none of them support the zero-based regulation piece of it, I would assume, because that is more work for them to try to justify the regs.
Yeah, the agencies are not clamoring to do that work. That's correct.
Okay. And so I guess my question would be, since it seems like the political will for this kind of comes exclusively from the legislature, has the legislature identified specific rules at different agencies that are an example of what the type of fat that you're expecting to cut? Because, I mean, one thing that I think we always have a problem with is, one person's red tape is another person's, due process, right? And that's the kind of values they inculcate in graduates of the Masters of Public Administration program at the University of Georgia. Fine school, it's SPIA. But no, I mean, it really is this matter of perspective, right? That if once you start cutting, then you realize, okay, now we're cutting something that means something to somebody. I'm kind of curious what the universe of regs is that we think we could cut that would be easy for agencies to cut that we've already identified.
I think that depends on what industry you're in. There's a senator that I respect a lot, and he actually was in the paper last week, and he said we want to give small businesses all the tools they need to succeed and not crush them under a mountain of paperwork.
Right.
And so if that senator happened to be the one asking me questions right now, I would tell that senator that unless you live through the process of being crushed by the mountains of paperwork, which incidentally, I had a constituent who recently went through the process of wanting to start a hair salon. And the process of doing that for a licensed cosmetologist who had been licensed for 20 years was incredibly onerous. But for the fact that she was able to make certain phone calls to certain agencies because she's my wife, it would have delayed that process probably 60 days, 90 days if she just didn't know who to call. But I was able to point her in the right directions of the agencies to call. And so I think that what I would say in my interaction with most of these agencies is their intent is not to throw up roadblocks that are difficult to navigate. Their intent is to have rules that make sense for the citizens of the state of Georgia, but they're also not the ones that have to go through the process of complying with them. And so to the extent that we as legislators have a voice in that process and are the ones that typically are hearing from the constituents, to the extent that we are also the ones that can have a voice in ratifying those rules that we know will cost us significant amount of money, I think that that's a valid endeavor for the General Assembly to go through.
And I deserve that. For turning committee into the floor, I definitely deserve you quoting that quote. What I will say is, and this is why I opened with the minority party has been supportive of elements of regulatory reform when they've been specific. I mean, I think if you see opposition to this bill that we've tried to forecast to you clearly, it's because of the broad sweeping approach that it takes, and the concern that if we're not identifying narrowly tailored ways to do this, that, you know, this sort of thing turns into a more amorphous distrust for our agencies in general. But again, I should not put quotes in the paper that you can then use at committee hearings. So I appreciate the
I
senator's
understand
time. Thank you.
that there may have been more context in that quote that
Oh,
you
of course.
provided. as
It's
well.
Thank you, Senator
That's fine.
McLaurin.
Thank you.
We're going to have one final question from Vice Chairman Ginn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that when I look at line 112, we're talking about the $1 million threshold. It's over a 5-year period, and I think about somebody implements a rule, I don't know what agency, you pick it whatever you want to, but one of my colleagues here said something about this is going to cost their business or their individual citizen. That's only 20 cents a year for 5 years for 10 plus million people. We've got 11 million people in the state to get $1 million. And I'm thinking 20 cents a year per citizen in the state. I like the bill. The bill's a great bill, but I'm worried about the threshold of what, over 5 years, that math, I'm thinking 20 cents a year per capita.
Yeah, I would tell you, Mr. Senator, that I am not married to that $1 million number. Florida, I believe, had a $5 million in theirs. Don't 100% quote me on that, but I believe that was their number. Different states have done different numbers. This was an attempt to recognize a significant number. If we want to increase that significant number such that the economic impact analysis is a higher hurdle to reach, I'm open to the wisdom of the committee in that.
Okay.
I'm ready to make a motion when you are, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we're going to entertain in just 1 second. I just want to first thank the Lieutenant Governor's Office for all their hard work, and Chairman Dolezal for all your hard work. You've worked hard on this. You've really went to the well on this, and it is good about cutting regulations. I mean, I owned a small business at one time. I had a little restaurant, and the regulations I had to go through to get opened, and I wanted to get that cash register ringing so I could make money, and I want to do anything we can to help small business. To your point, we talk about Delta and Home Depot and all the big companies we have here, and we're grateful for those, but small business is the backbone of our economy, and we need to do everything we can to roll out the red carpet and help them get their cash registers ringing, in my opinion. So I want to thank again the Lieutenant Governor's Office and you for all your hard work on that, and I'll entertain a motion.
I move do pass LC 550474S.
Okay?
Second.
Okay, I got a motion from Vice Chairman Ginn, a second from Senator Senator Summers.
Any discussion, Mr. Chairman?
All right, any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I'm really trying to wrap my head around the legislation, and I understand, and I thank the author of the bill for his explanation of what's going on. My concern is we're creating another agency, if you will, on top of an agency who now has purview over what this other agency is going to do, and that's the General Assembly inserting themselves in the process. And this bill also mentions local governments, and local governments deals with a lot of safety issues. They deal with a lot of environmental issues. And yes, those environmental issues may impact small business to a much greater extent, but now we're holding local governments, all of them, small governments as well as large governments like Atlanta, to the same standard as one in a much smaller community down in South Georgia. So I find it very difficult to support the legislation because it just appears to be too broad of a sweep, and I believe what the author is trying to do on this bill. And one of the questions that I failed to answer is to try and get a better explanation of how this would impact local governments, particularly the large cities that we have in the state of Georgia, and the difference between that and the smaller cities as well. Perhaps the author of the bill, prior to the vote, can at least give me some insight on some of that.
Okay.
It's up to you, Chairman.
If you would like to answer it, or
So local governments are not subject to any of the rules other than that they are a consideration of the economic impact analysis. Should an agency of the state pass a rule that the local governments are subject to, their expense needs to be considered in whether or not the economic impact analysis is required. So we're not creating any more rules for local governments. If anything, we're protecting local governments in this bill in the same way that we're protecting businesses, and that we're requiring the ratification of new rules that do pass on significant expense to local governments.
You're going to see a reduction in your paperwork at your Ford dealership when we pass this bill. All right.
I was just thinking, I was just looking at, thinking the last 20-some years, Republican, your party is in control for, for all the, all the agencies, everything, and you made the state #1 state to do business. I'm trying to figure out what rules you're trying to, cut or roll back that isn't your own,
Okay.
I mean, you all created this thing. You're saying, any specific you can even think of, agency that created a role that you all didn't create it, your administration didn't create it.
Are you recognizing me, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Yes, we are constantly in the process and constantly hearing about licensing issues, regulatory issues around various things as it relates to the food service industry is something that we've heard about. But we have this hallway is full of people that are representing industry that are communicating issues that they may have or things that they may want to see done. I would tell you that I believe that the growth of the administrative state, to your point, has happened under both Democrat and Republican rule, if you will. And so I don't think it's exclusive to any single party. I think that what this recognizes that if left unchecked and unreviewed, what happens in the rulemaking process is oftentimes you have rule layered on top of rule layered on top of rule, such that we don't even recognize rules that have been in place for decades. My local county government, for example, is in the midst of a situation right now where their attorney was not aware of a certain rule that existed, and they proceeded with some activity locally that was in violation of state law that their attorney, who happens to be one of the leading municipal attorneys in the state of Georgia, was not aware of. So I think that we see it happens all the time that these rules that have been on the books for decades. It probably should be looked at.
All right, thank you. We're going to have one final comment, and then I'm going to call the question. Senator Watson.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I mean, one thing when I came to the legislature is that, we get a lot of constituent calls. And I would be willing to bet you everybody here, Democrat, Republican, gets a lot of them. And it is disappointing. It is disappointing to me as an elected official that our citizens are having to call us to help them navigate licenses, death certificates, Medicaid, all these issues that the state handles. It is also rewarding, and I'm sure you have found that also, that when we do point them in the right direction, that many times, if not almost always, things start to happen. And so it's disappointing yet rewarding our position. And I think if you're willing to embrace maybe streamlining rules and maybe looking at the economic impact, maybe making things easier, it will be a good thing from that standpoint. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to call the question.
Okay, we're going to call the question. We've got a motion by Vice Chairman again, and a second by Senator Summers. I'm going to ask all in favor to raise your hand. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All opposed? 4, 7-4. Your bill passes. Thank you very much.
Chairman, members of the
Let's
committee.
continue to help small business.
Thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to ask if we could hear one more bill. Senator Albers, if you'd come up, I'd like to hear Senate Bill 111. That's your data privacy bill. If you could quickly go through that and tell us a little bit about it. And we
Sure
got
will.
one speaker on support of that.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for your time. Thank you, committee members. We passed this bill last year. It is the Georgia Consumer Data Privacy Protection Act. Just a very quick background, because I know you're pressed on time. We've been working on this for about 1.5 years. We had a Senate study committee. I want to thank the members of the Senate for voting for that, and Lieutenant Governor for appointing both industry experts as well as senators to come up with good comprehensive reform. This is already in 20 states, and about 25 more are going to pass when one this year. This is the pro-Georgia version. It is not the California version. It is the one that works well to make sure we're protecting everybody's privacy. There are many sections to this. I won't take you through each one because we've already passed this bill. We have worked closely with TechNet and TAG and all the business leaders to make sure everybody's protected. There's a lot of definitions in this bill. That's why it's so thick. It exempts things that are already in place. We've had HIPAA for over 20 years now for health insurance, Graham-Leach-Bliley, Sarbanes-Oxley, all those other things that are there. This makes sure that we're protecting people's data. We're not selling it, we're not target marketing it, we're not profiling people, et cetera, unless they give their expressed consent for that reason. Data is the modern-day oil or gold. And we want to make sure that people's data is protected. They have the chance to opt out of that and as well as remove their data. And that this will ultimately protect people's data by making sure they have basic security parameters and controls around them. Mr. Chairman, I don't want to go section by section. I know you're short on time, but I'm happy to answer questions or go in deeper detail in anywhere you'd like me to.
I do want you to just go to 105 and talk a little bit about profiling and making sure that that's not happening here. On 105 to 108, can you just talk a little bit about those
Certainly,
lines?
And that's actually being done today. So it's a definition that if you think about whether you go online and you go to look at buying some new socks, and then all of a sudden you're getting hit with ads everywhere for socks. You use social media profile and they find out where you're going, and then they start enticing you to get back into their social media or buy more things or go further. They do it in the financial world. They're taking everything from your credit card statements, they're trying to build a profile on you, how to best target everything about you in today's day and age. And it should be a little scary to all of us. And this is an effort to all of us as consumers to say, hey, I want to opt out of all that.
Okay. All right. Which one?
10.
10? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Chairman Albers, for bringing this. Is this exactly the same or functionally the same as the bill we passed out of the Senate last year?
It's probably 99% the same. We made a couple of tweaks that people found specifically working with the Technology Association of Georgia and TechNet, and they were all little kind of technical cleanups. But it's basically what we passed last year, and you'll find that they are all supporting and endorsing the bill.
And is it not true that I supported the bill last year, continue to support it because I think it's an obvious step in the right direction?
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate your help.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, hold on. We got one public comment on, is Mason Rainey here? And if you could be quick, I know you're in support.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Mason Rainey with the Technology Association of Georgia, or TAG. We are a membership trade association representing over 1,200 technology and tech-enabled organizations throughout the state. As the chairman mentioned, over 20 states have currently passed this data privacy legislation, and the need for the consumer protections has become very clear. Our members value data privacy, and TAG supports this important legislation, and we just want to thank Senator Albers for his hard work and collaboration on this bill. That's been over a year in the process. Thank you, everyone.
Chairman Albers, I want to thank you for this, too. Did you want to speak real quick? You didn't sign up?
If it would be okay.
All right, 1 minute.
Don't even need 1 minute.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Dave Williams with the Metro Atlanta Chamber. As Chairman Albers mentioned, SB 111 is very substantially similar to last year's bill, which we were fine with. Metro Atlanta Chamber supports the bill, and we encourage the committee to pass it out.
Okay. Thank you for all your hard work on this. If there's no other questions, I'll entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we got a motion by Chairman Summers. We got a second by Senator McLaurin. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your right hand. Thanks. All right, it passed unanimous. Great job. Thank you. We'll hear your other one later. We got to run, so the meeting's adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, committee.